Juliet Carpenter is a Marie Curie Research Fellow at ENS Lyon, and she's carrying out a 2-year cross-national research project analyzing urban regeneration and governance in France and the UK. In particular, community engagement in governance practices and the role of unheard voices, the topic you're going to speak about, and she has published about that.
Thanks. And thanks to Barbara as well, because I think it's going to make quite an interesting contrast to what I'm going to be saying now. So yes, I'm an urban geographer. That's my background. I'm working currently in a planning school, planning institute. So that's where I'm coming from, if you like. So it's quite interesting. Already we're having different approaches, and I think it's going to be quite interesting as the next 2 days sort of play out how the different disciplines are interacting and interrogating the banlieue. So what I'm going to talk about today, that's right, is some research I've been doing I'm currently based in Lyon, on urban regeneration and governance, exploring how so-called unheard voices are integrated into regeneration governance processes. Et je vais communiquer en anglais, mais si jamais il y a des questions en français, après ça pose pas de problème. Donc, just as an outline of my talk, I'm going to give a brief introduction, then give some of the theoretical frameworks, theoretical backdrop that's informing the study. I'll say a bit about the methods, as well as the context for those who aren't familiar with Lyon and the governance structures in the city. I'll say talk about some of the emerging findings. The study hasn't finished yet, but these are what's coming out of the work, and then draw some conclusions. So I think from the literature in geography, urban geography, Sciences Po, sociology, I think we're familiar with this shift that we've seen over the last 10 to 15 years from government to governance, and it's quite well documented in the literature that urban governance does present some very complex challenges to integrate the varied voices in the city, the different voices that we can hear. And also I think it's clear from the literature that this is a very uneven territory, that different groups have differential access to power and decision making within the city. And within this, I think what's interesting to explore is what the role is for the traditionally so-called unheard voices in potential participatory mechanisms, governance mechanisms, that could allow them to express themselves and their views on the city and its future. And what I've been doing is exploring these sorts of issues within the context of neighbourhood level regeneration. So I'm looking at very much the neighbourhood level governance structures, but how those fit within wider governance structures within the city, the agglomeration, and even within the country, within the national context. So just some of the theory that's feeding into the study. Issues of participation aren't new to the geographers, to the planners. Sherry Arnstein in 1969 brought us the ladder of participation, and within that, and more recently, she's made us aware, and others, of the issues of power that lie at the heart of questions around participation. But what it's interesting to explore is what is the potential for participation process to be inclusive and empowering of those groups who are perhaps disenfranchised or don't normally get involved in decision making within the city. And I think in parallel what we can see currently, and particularly very recently in France, is really the crisis in representative democracy. So many people don't feel represented by their elected officials. There's been an erosion of ties between political parties and civil society, and this has really come to the fore, particularly recently in the elections, the second round, which was last Sunday, of the municipal elections, where abstention rates were 38% nationally, which is in the second round, which is a record. And in Vaughan-Velin, which is the case study area I'm taking in Lyon, the first round is up to 62% abstention rate, which really shows a disenfranchisement, a really disenfranchisement of the population. And raises questions about legitimacy as well, of the decisions that are being taken within the town halls. So what I'm exploring is what is the role for participatory democracy to address this crisis more generally, and then in the context of France, how does that play out in the French context? And one of the things I'm also exploring within my study is this idea of spaces of participation, which Carpenter brought us. Integrating notions of power, how do different spaces of participation help us understand who gets involved in participatory processes. So he has devised this typology, three-point typology, closed or uninvited spaces, which are really sort of decisions taken behind closed doors by bureaucrats, by those elected, with little involvement of residents. Invited spaces, where people are invited by different authorities to participate in decision making. And then claimed or created spaces, so spaces claimed by less powerful actors for more powerful power holders. What Cornwall calls organic spaces, so this idea that they're moving, they're almost sort of evolving with time. So it's this sort of idea, this theory of spaces of participation. Participation is one of the structuring frameworks of the study that I'm doing. And the methods that I've been using, well, this is a cross-national study exploring governance for urban regeneration in France and England, and I'm taking a case study approach. So I'm looking at, the case study I'm reporting on today is the one in Greater Lyon. It's the commune of Vanvelin, where there's been a long history of regeneration policy in the city, and a strong tradition of active neighbourhood associations. The other case studies, just for your interest, are Saint-Étienne and Birmingham and Sheffield in the UK. And the methods I've been using, well, it's a sort of mixed methods approach, trying to address these questions from different angles. So firstly, I've been using qualitative, semi-structured interviews to inform the research. Firstly, interviewing stakeholders, so the people in the commune, at the Grand Lyon, the agglomeration, the regeneration agency, the Grand Projet de Ville, the GPV, and then talking to local residents and associations as well about their experience of engaging with participatory processes. So all these interviews are being recorded and transcribed for analysis. And I'm also looking at sort of discourse analysis, looking through policy documents over the last 10, 15, 20 years to review the interpretive context and the argumentation behind these policies, these regeneration policies, to really get behind, to explore the narratives and the meanings behind what the policies are actually saying. As Van den Brink and Metz say, words matter in policy and planning. It's really, the words can help us understand what the messages are behind the documents. So I'm exploring the meaning of these policy texts related to regeneration, governance and participation, using what Haya says, using the method that Haya outlines, using metaphors, narrative and storylines, trying to tease out what the narratives are behind these policy documents, and then contrasting that with what's being said through the interviews, residents and stakeholders. So just to say a bit about the context in Lyon. Lyon is France's second city, set within a context that's traditionally strong in terms of central government, despite decentralisation since 1982. I think we can still say it's a strong centralised country. But with this multi-layered millefeuille of institutional governance structures, so we have the state, the region, the department, the agglomeration, the Grand Lyon, the city, Vanvelin, the neighbourhood. So there's a real sort of layered governance structure. And I think what's important to remember is, in contrast, particularly in my study to the UK, is the importance of the municipal level and the mayor and the power that the mayor has. with over 36,000 communes, each with their own mayor, with their own planning deputy. So I think it's important to bear that in mind, particularly when we talk later about the analysis and participation. So just some figures there on Greater Lyon, the size, the Lyon city, and Vaux-en-Velin, which is the commune I'm taking, is 40,000 people, so it's really quite significant. I think it's the second or third largest commune in the Grand Lyon area. And this just to give you an idea of where it is situated in the Grand Lyon area, which is the purple area. Vaux-en-Velin is there on the right, the sort of funnel-shaped commune to the right in the eastern suburb, the eastern banlieue of Greater Lyon. And actually Vaux-en-Velin is the third poorest city, a little known fact, third poorest city in the whole of France when you take income and unemployment. It really gives you some idea of the deprivation and the potential social and economic exclusion that's really affecting residents in Vaux-en-Velin. Population grew significantly in the 1960s and 70s due to immigration, particularly due to the significant house building programme. And here we can see the different urban policies that have affected Vaux-en-Velin in the last 20-30 years in particular, with the ZUP, major social housing programme, the Grand Projet Urbain and the Grand Projet de Ville. The ZUP was designated in 1963, and in the 1970s there was a rapid social house building programme, mostly HLM, so mostly attracting low-income population, ethnic minority families, and in particular with a lack of local employment opportunities. So very much housing-based regeneration with very little thought about providing opportunities for employment, and I think that's one of the roots of some of the problems that have come forward in the following years. The housing itself was put up quite rapidly and quickly has fallen into disrepair, so there are environmental issues around the housing as well. And then this issue of social and economic exclusion, which really goes to the heart of some of the problems in places like Vaux-en-Velin, some of the sort of underlying issues, structural issues affecting the population, which culminated in 1990 with urban unrest, the revolte sociale in Lyon as in other communes around France. To give you some idea of the sort of built environment, the fabric there on the top of an aerial photo of La Rapinière, which is the quartier, the city that I'm looking at in Vaux-en-Velin. So sort of low-rise social housing with quite a lot of green space built into îlots. And there at the bottom there from the municipal archives, some postcards that were produced at the time in the 1960s, 70s for people to send home, send back, to say, you know, show people where they were now living, this new area that they were moving into. So Vaux-en-Velin is, you know, as we're familiar, this typical image of the French banlieue. It's really at the edge of urban space. It's at the edge of urban society. It's really a marginal space within the Lyon context. And as I say, culminating in this social economic exclusion, culminating in social unrest in 1990. And really, Vaux-en-Velin became a symbol within the French administration at a national level of the failure to integrate non-French immigrants into French society. And became, if you like, a testing ground for new policy. So the Grand Projet de Ville was set up in 1999 and still going on today with new projects being brought on stream. With it's a comprehensive national urban regeneration programme involving demolition and rebuilding. And in particular, the Rapinière area has been affected by that in the northern part of the commune of Vaux-en-Velin. And just to show you some of the key indicators for the Rapinière, this housing estate, really on all key indicators, it's more deprived than even Vauvelin and certainly the rest of Lyon. So just to show you some of the issues in La Rapinière there. So the top photos, again, just to give you some idea of the built environment. That's some of the housing as it stands today, and the current Grand Projet de Ville proposals for new housing, developing the green space, and really sort of opening up the area, creating new sort of walkways and streets through to break up the îlot. So that's the proposals for the area. So what I've been doing is trying to look at participation within this area, setting it within the context of national policies to regenerate areas and including participation. And what it shows is that the majority of national policies over the last 30 years have, on paper at least, encouraged resident participation in regeneration programs, and they give space to the rhetoric of citizen engagement and participatory exercises. But what it seems is the reality on the ground has been really quite different. There hasn't been any consultation framework offered, there's no guidance, there's no sort of guidelines on how consultation participation should take place. It's not within the culture in France to consult, like it has been in the UK for some years. How inclusive are the participatory processes that are actually put in place? And are these unheard voices that I'm exploring actually sought out and listened to? How far are those unheard voices really sort of integrated? I mean, there are lots of questions there. What is quite interesting, hopefully we will hear about this tomorrow from Mohamed Meshmash, who will be doing the keynote speech tomorrow morning. Some of these questions were actually explored by Marianne Baquet and Mohamed Meshmash in the report that it produced for the Ministry of Cities last summer, Ça ne se fera plus sans nous, which explored how participatory processes actually take place at the national level within regeneration frameworks, and put forward some proposals for how the government could actually put in place tools and mechanisms to make it a more inclusive, open process in terms of participation. And basically, some of the findings of that report were that the politique de ville is really being seen as having abandoned local people over the last 10-15 years. And despite the rhetoric, urban policy has been made without local people integrated into the decision making. And what the key underlying issues are. Some of the key underlying issues affecting people disenfranchised and people in the banlieue are unemployment, real structural issues, unemployment, lack of job opportunities, issues of racism, which all generate this high abstention rates, high disenfranchisement within the electoral system. And also the issue of the lack of voting rights for non-French nationals, which was an issue that came up in the recent elections as well. So there's a new law for the ville et la cohésion urbaine, which was voted in February 2014, but I think many would argue that it doesn't go far enough. It really doesn't take those proposals on board. It doesn't go far enough, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that tomorrow from Mohamed Meshmash. Just to go back to sort of some of the rhetoric then behind the policies that have been in place over the last 30 years or so. Within each policy document, there's discussion about involving residents, must involve participation, must involve consultation, but at each stage there's a failure to actually integrate people meaningfully into the sort of redevelopment of their areas, into the reorganisation, the regeneration of their areas. And again, I mean, another example, more locally then, is participation in Lyon. the Greater Lyon area, the Grand Lyon, drew up a participation charter in 2009. It was conscious that residents were actually wanting to get involved. It was signed by the Grand Lyon and Commune and various NGOs, and it set out in the introduction the 4 options for participation. So we have information, consultation, dialogue and co-production. And what they explicitly say is that they choose concertation. So la consultation est une aide à la conception, c'est pas une coproduction. La consultation est une aide à la décision, pas une codécision. So they're really actually quite explicit about trying to channel residents' views into sort of a discussion, a dialogue, but actually not into co-production and really sort of integrating residents into co-decision making. So this explicit, if you like, sort of exclusion of residents in the really meaningful aspect of regeneration sort of policy, regeneration sort of decision making, I think is quite interesting there. And it's that I'm trying to explore with the Grand Lyon, talking to stakeholders and really to get to the bottom of the barriers that they feel to actually involving residents more meaningfully in regeneration. And I think one of the issues that's coming out is this enduring appeal of representative democracy, the importance of representative democracy in French political culture, the privileged position of the elected mayor in the commune, and so it's difficult to open up decision-making processes to the wider public. But it comes both from people within the commune as well as residents themselves who say, well, actually, we've voted for our elected officials. It's up to them to take the decision. So I have heard that within interviews with residents that they actually feel that within the current structure of democracy that it's up to the elected officials. The mayor has the role of decision making. So there's this sort of tension, if you like, between a desire for residents to get involved for participation mechanisms, as well as a sort of reluctance coming from various quarters to actually fully integrate residents into decision making. And certainly within strategic issues in Vaughan-Velin, that was made clear that is non-negotiable. These are closed spaces if we go back to Carpenter's spaces of participation. Issues related to daily life, local spaces, redeveloping a park, a playground for kids. I mean, that's more an invited space, if you like. People are invited to give their views. Those views won't necessarily be taken into account, but they're actually people are invited to feed into consultation on issues related to daily life. Claim spaces. There's some evidence of claim spaces within Vaughan-Velin, but limited so far from what I've seen. And it's perhaps that's worth exploring, this idea of claim spaces and why people aren't coming forward to sort of claim a role, claim a space at the table for decision making. That's finished, right? Okay. Well, that's so I won't go into that. That's invited spaces within Vaughan-Velin. Some of the mechanisms and tools. We have this dichotomy in spaces of participation. Troubled lives is one of the reasons that have been given for residents not being invited to take a greater role in decision-making, strategic decision-making. It's true that there is extreme poverty, jobs and housing are a priority, and it's felt within the mairie that people don't really have the time or space to feed into, for example, a 15-year vision for their area. Bureaucracy is complex. There are mismatches in timing, which mean that really unheard voices aren't seen as a priority. And so just to move on quickly to the emerging conclusions, I think there are benefits of involving residents in urban regeneration projects. These are acknowledged in the rhetoric. Empowerment is one of the key words that people are talking about now, but really how far is that being put into practice through mechanisms, tools. there's a discourse of official documents purporting to support participation, but it's not materialising on the ground. And I think what this highlights is these ambiguities and tensions in reconciling participation with deep-rooted traditions of representative democracy. And I think what we need is a culture change to fully embrace participation as a valid means of policy making. We need new tools and resources to reach the unheard voices. And here I think Barbara's example is quite interesting to discuss, to think about why in Strasbourg that actually worked in your example, and why that's not actually coming forward in somewhere like Banlieue. And I think what we need is new democratic spaces to offer meaningful opportunities for dialogue and decision making within the neighbourhoods. So thanks for listening. Sorry for going on.